South Africa's Competition Tribunal has dismissed applications and objections brought by various local and foreign banks to escape prosecution in an ongoing case of investigation rallied around alleged currency manipulation. In February 2017, the Competition Commission referred a number of banks, including Investec, Standard Bank and Absa, to the Competition Tribunal for price fixing involving the rand. The commission ultimately brought 28 banks under investigation, including Nedbank and FirstRand, in what it is calling the Forex Cartel case. The commission is accusing the banks of colluding on forex deals and thus manipulating the foreign exchange market by fixing the price of the rand for several seconds and even minutes several times between 2007 and until at least September 2013. It also alleged that the banks had divided markets by allocating customers in the USD-ZAR currency pair. Now, the Competition Tribunal dismissed all of the different applications and objections submitted by 15 banks, insisting that the financial institutions will be probed to the letter. And now this morning, joining the conversation is Professor William Boshoff, who is a professor and co-director, Center for Competition Law and Economics, Department of Economics, Stellenbosch University. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining the conversation.
Thank you.
Now, first off, to educate the audience, I'd like to know what currency manipulation means, how it works, and what implication it has on financial transactions.
Well, Akan, the currency manipulation refers to manipulating the price of the currency, which is referred to typically as the exchange rate. So any currency is expressed in terms of some foreign currency, let's say in this case the rand in terms of the US dollar. So if you want to purchase dollars, you have to provide rands in exchange, and the other way around, if you want to purchase rands from elsewhere, you have to provide dollars. Now in that market where that two forces come together for demand and supply of rands and dollars, that's called the Forex market. Now, it's a very, very large market, one of the largest markets in the world. A lot of money gets traded, and a big part of it is not really for purposes of buying or selling stuff in dollars or rands. It's just manipulation, speculation, and investment purposes. So, what happened here is that there are, of course, many thousands of transactions going on. They are run typically by different banks, and the allegation is that the different banks shared information with each other so that the person doing the buying and the person doing the selling have the same information about the other party, which means that the average prices, depending on what they are doing, the average price will be different from what it would be under normal competitive conditions when you don't know what your other competitors and buyers and sellers are doing. So that's what manipulation means in this context. It's that the price of the currency, which is the exchange rate, that exchange rate is different, and depending on the perspective you take, it can be higher or lower than it would have been if there was no manipulation.
All right, but
the implication of that, as you asked last part, the implication of that is, of course, has a huge effect, because the exchange rate determines the price at which imports come into the country, and of course the price that we get when we export stuff. So it has a huge implication for many South African businesses if the exchange rate changes, or because of manipulation. The size of the manipulation must still be determined. We don't know the details of that yet, but it is certainly, there is a potential impact on businesses and consumers.
All right, Professor, but then some analysts have actually argued that the way financial institutions see currency manipulation is that they try to influence the values of domestic currencies so as to protect domestic industries and of course to boost exports of these African countries, or these countries as it were, looking at the Forex market. So is it that the intentions are altruistic, are true, but then the way by which they go by the issue of protecting their interests within their jurisdiction is wrong? Can we safely put it that way?
Well, the different banks are, of course, interested in their own profits, and depending on whether they are buying or selling currency, they would like a higher or a lower price. So at the end of the day, the traders themselves do not really consider the possible impact of what they are doing on other parties. Because in the South African case, the market for foreign currency is a completely free market. There's no government intervention in setting the level of the currency. So when the commission is bringing this case, they are saying, well, we are happy with it to be a free market, but then it should be free in the sense of there should not be this discussion between potential buyers and potential sellers, which might affect the price. We want the price to be determined in as competitive as possible way.
All right. Now, Professor, we're talking about a case that started way back 2007 up to 2013. So why is it that this issue is just coming to light? Why did the practice go on for a while, for that much long, and it wasn't detected by the so-called regulatory authorities that are meant to monitor these processes and put them in check?
Well, first thing to say is that typical cartel cases often take very, very long. Competition cases, especially where transgressions of the competition law is involved, tend to take many years because, of course, they have to be detected. Detection is not easy, and that's why it happens. So cartels can function. People can talk to one another in secret and make deals and set prices. And it takes a while for competition authorities anywhere in the world, actually, to be able to detect what's going on. So different competition authorities have different tools they use to try and get information so that they can easily or earlier detect a cartel. So that's the first thing to remember. The second, so in this case in particular, remember the Forex market, as I said, is a very, very large market with a very large number of players. So and the transactions take place. There are literally thousands of transactions taking place every second. So it's difficult to think about it in that way because we're not so used to so many transactions. But it is difficult when you have all those millions of transactions going around to see something's wrong with a few of them. And I guess when it comes to actually determining the effect of these activities, then the question is going to be, well, how big was this effect at the end of the day on the currency? So it's very difficult. I have sympathy for the authorities. It is a very difficult thing to detect beforehand or while it is occurring, and often only comes out if there's a whistleblower, somebody comes and reports something to the commission, or they actually use a bit of analysis and collect a bit of data. But again, these markets are so complex to actually detect them in real time is quite, I think, quite difficult. Even for an advanced commission in Europe or the US, I think it would be challenging.
All right, but then talking about complexity, Professor, we know that the Commission Tribunal has sanctioned so-called cartels in the past. So is it being that hard for the Commission Tribunal to carry out this process because it is a first in the banking sector? Or where would you say the problem actually lies? You've talked about the fact that they would have to cast their net through a plethora of banking, financial institutions, and the likes. So is this a first case for the tribunal that makes it so hard for them to detect where the issues are and to be able to prefer proper sanctions to these would-be culprits?
Well, it is certainly an interesting case in the financial services industry where we have not seen as many competition law investigations and specifically dealing with cartel-like conduct. But the South African Competition Commission has been quite active and successful, I would say, in prosecuting a very large variety of cartels in a very large a number of sectors in the South African economy. So they certainly have the let's say the record in successfully prosecuting these cases. And of course, when you get to these cases from the legal perspective, your first, the main focus is really just on showing that there has been some form of agreement between different buyers or sellers. So the emphasis on will fall less, at least in the initial stages or the initial types of cases brought on the effect. The question will just be, have you tried to manipulate this using some form of agreement, talking to one another, for example? And in that respect, the Commission has quite a lot of experience. Whether that actually happened and how, these are very, very fine details, which I'm sure the lawyers will argue about for a long time. But it's certainly possible. I don't think the Commission has a problem in terms of its ability to prosecute, but it is true. These markets are complicated, and it does require, I think that's also why it takes so long to prosecute. It does require quite a detailed understanding of how these markets work, and I guess that's why this case might take some time still as well.
But then from your response, it is looking as though RAM manipulation is a serious allegation that could spin out consequences beyond South Africa's borders. Now, are foreign organizations and, of course, foreign investors and banks monitoring the case? What do you think their predisposition is to issues like this?
Yeah, so there have been cases of let us say bid rigging. So I must maybe explain that quickly. Of course, in these markets, these currency markets, the different buyers and sellers make bids, and then the price at the end of the day settles at a certain level. Now, there has been allegations of manipulation, if you want, or bid rigging. In other financial markets internationally, most famously interest rates in the UK and in the US, determined by reference to, I'm talking about the so-called LIBOR case in London. So these cases have been investigated internationally. I think banks will have a careful look at this because, of course, traders are used to talking to one another, how they communicate with their counterparts, what platforms they're using. Because, of course, the main issue here, the focus of the Commission is on the sharing of information on electronic platforms, which is the platform on which the traders are trading as well. So I think there will be, and there probably already are, quite a bit of focus across the major banks to train staff on what are appropriate forms of behavior and what information can you share with your fellow traders and whatnot. So it is an interesting case. I think it is a case that will be closely watched because it has, of course, has implications in terms of financial implications as well for these banks. Because once you are convicted of collusion, of a cartel activity, you're also open to further damages claims down the line.
All right, now that brings me to my next question, because you're saying that it brings about some sort of financial implications to these banks that have been indicted. The same banks that for years have built a reputation, because you describe them as major banks, which is they are banks probably with huge capitals, with huge credentials, as it were, who have been enmeshed in this sort of price fixing and currency manipulation. But then how does it affect the customers in this case? What impact would it bring to them?
So the effect will ultimately be quite indirect. So it is probably not, so clearly that the particular banks might might some other banks that have been the victim of these manipulation might say, well, we have paid a wrong we've been charged a wrong exchange rate, if you want, and we want compensation for our clients. That would be a more direct effect. But what you are talking about here is the end consumer, and I think the effect there is if the exchange, let's suppose somehow they managed to raise the exchange rate a little bit. So in other words, the rand, instead of being, let's say, for argument's sake, instead of being 15 rand per dollar, it was 15 rand 50. Now that means any imports, for example, coming into the country is 50 cents per dollar. It's more expensive. So prices of imported stuff go up. And depending on how those costs are absorbed through the supply chains in the economy, the end consumer might actually end up paying more for imported products, and big businesses that are exporting receive less. So the consumer will be affected, but I must tell you, I think it will be quite difficult to pinpoint exactly how much the consumer finally pays. It will probably in these cases be easier if there are direct claims from the bank's clients themselves.
All right, now that the Competition Tribunal has dismissed all counter allegations and applications by the local banks to strike the case out of court, now do we have a time frame? Because it seems as though these local banks are trying to frustrate the processes and, of course, the probings by the Competition Tribunal. Do we have a time frame by which you think these investigations will be concluded and sanctions will be meted out to banks that are found culpable?
Yeah, so this will take a while. I mean, the banks may well consider alternative avenues to try to overturn the decision by the ruling by the Competition Tribunal. South Africa has a multi-layer competition law system. Our commission is the first layer. The tribunal acts like a second layer, or a type of court. And then there's a third competition appeals court, which can, in some situations, overturn the tribunal's decision. And then beyond the competition appeal court, you also have our constitutional court, and in some instances, our Supreme Court. So, I mean, there are always some legal avenues for further delaying the process. And then, of course, all of this information must still be trawled through. And I have no doubt that this is going to take several more years before we see a conclusion, except if somehow the banks then come to some kind of a settlement agreement with the Commission. But it's not like these things are not likely to happen very, very soon.
All right, thank you so much, Professor. At this point, it will be very, very expedient for policymakers and, of course, regulators to come up with regulatory mechanisms to stem the tide and probably nip in the bud these unwholesome activities to give financial institutions the strength that they need in their operations. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us.
Yeah.